Most books try to affect personality ethics, which in turn attempt to alter just attitudes and behaviors. This book stands out because it attempts to change character ethics, which helps change perceptions and paradigms. Imagine yourself trying to put on a pair of tight jeans. You eventually get them over your thighs and you try to zip up the zipper and you're struggling. You're sucking in your gut in order to try to button that button, and you realize that you have gained a lot of weight. Imagine yourself questioning if God exists, asking what happens after death. Imagine being told by your boss that the company's payroll can no longer support your position. Imagine your relationship ending with your long-term girlfriend or boyfriend. These are all things that may happen to us because we're not effective. That's what this book is. There are 7 habits of highly effective people. I'll go into each habit one by one, explaining what it is and how to tie it into your own life. The first habit we're going to discuss is being proactive. I have a coworker who is always disgruntled. He talks about how terrible his life is, how his neighbors hate him, how his parents don't talk to him, about how his brothers and sisters are better than he is, how his girlfriend doesn't care what he thinks, how terrible the weather is. The first habit talks about realizing that there are 2 ways to live life. The first way is to live a reactive lifestyle. Things just seem to happen to you. You have no focus on being proactive in these issues because you're too busy reacting. You can either act or be acted upon, and that's being proactive. We all have a circle of concern, and a circle of concern is everything a person is concerned about, whether it be politics, personal health, sports teams, relationships. Within our circles of concern, we have a circle of influence. These are things that concern us that we have some type of control over. This is the circle we should be proactive in. Habit 1 talks about being proactive. Well, this means that Ken should be identifying that he has to be proactive and focus on the things he actually has an influence over. Instead of Ken worrying about what the weather's like outside or what his parents think about him or how successful his brothers and sisters are, he should be focusing on his circle of influence, the things he can change. His education level, his ability to produce more wealth, his health, his activity, his depth of relationships, his hobbies. Those are the areas of his life he should be focusing on, that he should be proactive in. If he's proactive within this circle of influence, his circle of influence grows inside of his circle of concern. And that's the first habit, is to be proactive. My brother works for a computer company. He knows a computer inside and out. He knows hardware, he knows software, he knows how to code many different languages in computer programming, and he started at this company pretty much from the bottom. He's developed his skills and he's developed his reputation within the company to the point where people respect him. He's the go-to guy for tasks, for projects. A manager position opened up in the company and my brother had vision towards that management position. That was his goal. He amped up his working habits. He studied coding. He was more productive. He helped out more, but he didn't get the promotion. My brother and I were talking about this, and I asked him, quite frankly, what he had done to work towards the promotion. My brother realized he did not work towards his goal of being a manager. And that's what this concept is begin with the end in mind. What you have to do is you have to envision your end goal before you work towards something. You have to take actions towards those goals too. When we start towards something, we should always think of our destination first, and then of how we're going to get there. It's easy to get caught up in an activity trap, to climb harder up the ladder of success one rung at a time, to busy ourselves, just to realize that the ladder's leaning against the wrong wall. Imagine we applied my brother's strategy to driving to Chicago from Florida. Before he started the trip, he never looked up a route, he never opened a map, he never bothered to even turn on a GPS. He would get in the car and he would start driving. He would make great turns. He would have great driving habits. He would plan when he would stop for gas. He'd get on the interstate. He'd drive fast. He'd have very good defensive driving techniques. Hours or days into the drive, he'd pull off the interstate and realize that he's in Denver. He's nowhere near Chicago. The correct way to get to Chicago would be to open a map or open a GPS and type in our end destination. To actually read the directions, we'd have to understand which interstate we're going to get on. We'd have to understand the length of the trip. We'd have to understand all these things and then take actions towards driving to Chicago. And if my brother were to have done that in his professional career, then he would recognize that I want to be manager one day. Well, the qualities of being a good manager are not necessarily just being a good worker. I have to take leadership roles in different projects. I have to get things done. My brother then took those directions and applied them, and he eventually got to it. This is the second habit of begin with the end in mind. Imagine waking up a little bit late in the morning and realizing you have no time to work out. You have no time to make breakfast. So you grab a Pop-Tart and head out for work. And you get to work and you sit down at your desk, and then you have your to-do list from the day before. You start working diligently towards your tasks for the day, and your boss interrupts you. He walks into the office with a stack of papers and says, "This is a project I need done today. It's a priority for me." So you begin working hour upon hour on this project, and you finally get it done. You deliver it to your boss, and then you go back to your to-do list just to find out that it's time to go home. And on your way home, you're too tired to even think of what to make for dinner, so you stop by and get fast food. You get home and you start eating your fast food, and you click on the TV. TV's entertaining to you, and then you suddenly realize that it's time to go to bed. You go to bed and you wake up the next morning and repeat. And then you repeat it the next day, then the next day. This is a scenario many people find themselves struggling with. And habit 3 explains a concept a lot of people also struggle with, which is time management. And there are 4 levels of time management that humans developed. The first level of time management is realizing that you have a lot of things to do in a day. So many things you have to do in a day that you might not be able to commit them all to memory. And this is where to-do lists came from. We write everything down. We write everything down so it's like a cognitive relief. We don't have to remember them anymore. But how do things get done? They get done from the top of the list to the bottom of the list. There's no prioritization. This leads us into level 2. This is scheduling on calendars. We write down when each item is going to get done from our to-do list. When we do this, we tend to stack items back to back. And then what happens? Interruptions happen. And that develops into level 3 of time management, which is kind of a daily planning based on our priorities and goals for the day. We look at the to-do list each morning and schedule it all into our day. It keeps us busy. But one interruption can derail us for multiple days. We don't really have a holistic view of what we should be working on and focusing on. This level 3 of time management is where most of us spend our lives. Then there's level 4. This is weekly planning of categorized activities. That's taking every activity on your to-do list and putting it into a certain category, and then planning in your week on a weekly basis these categorized activities. And you categorize your to-do list based on urgency and importance. And I want you to imagine that on a graph. There are things with high importance and high urgency, and then there are things with very low importance or low urgency. And let's first focus on the things that are urgent and important. These are crises or emergencies. They require immediate focus. Too much time with these items causes us to put out fires instead of actually focusing on things that we need to be proactive with. We become very reactive instead of proactive. The next quadrant are not important but urgent things. This is where we spend most of our time. These are interruptions in our days. We think they're urgent because they're other people's priorities, but they're not really urgent to us. This leads to a very short-term focus. This is your cubicle neighbor coming over and asking for help on a project. This is someone from downstairs asking you to run a report. It also makes you feel out of control over your time management. The next quadrant are not urgent and not important things. These are activities that are trivial. They're a big waste of time. If we focus on these activities, we find ourselves getting fired from jobs and being dependent on others. The last quadrant are the not urgent but important items. These are the things we know we should be doing, but they take the back burner. These are things like our health, our relationships. If we had more focus here, there would be a less occurrence of emergencies. But these activities are neglected because they don't feel urgent. Imagine applying this newfound habit in your daily routine. Imagine waking up to the sound of the beeping alarm clock and realizing that there are some important, but not urgent, things that you need to do before you go into work. So you wake up out of bed and you make your coffee. You drink your coffee and you get prepared to go for your morning run. You strap on your shoes, you run, you get your heart rate up, and you succeed. You feel accomplished that you ran that 9-minute mile you've been working towards. You get back, you shower, and you make yourself a well-prepared breakfast. You can leave for work about a half hour early, and you get to work. You begin to work on those things that are important but not urgent in your professional career. You also begin working on the emergencies, knowing that they are emergencies. However, there are only a few of these emergencies that you should be concerned with, because you've appropriately categorized those that fall into the category of other people's emergencies and not necessarily yours. So you work on these emergencies, then you work on these quadrant 2 activities in your professional career. You find yourself delegating those tasks that fall into the quadrant 3, and you find yourself rejecting the tasks that fall into quadrant 4. You have time in your day to take lunch and reflect on your day and your future plans for that night. You decide on what you're going to eat for dinner and you get back to work. You get back to work and then you realize that, hey, it's nearly time to go home. You start closing out the tasks that you've opened for the day and you drive to the grocery store. While driving to the grocery store, you really start thinking about where you are in your life and how satisfied you are, and where you're going with your life and how to get there. You buy your groceries realizing that shopping for your food is much cheaper than buying your food through a drive-thru. You reflect on your own personal finance situation and determine that you are satisfied and comfortable with where you are in your finances. You get home and you turn on the news while you cook your dinner. And after you're done eating, you sit down and you enjoy your dinner. And after dinner, you pick up one of your favorite books. A book that you dive into and start applying to your life to change for the better. You begin reflecting on your week's plan and tweaking those little areas that you need to tweak before bed, making the conscious choice that tomorrow morning when that alarm clock beeps, that you're going to be getting up and doing the same routine, not only because it's what you need to do, but because it is an important routine. And this is the third habit, is to put first things first. These first 3 habits covered in the book, which are deciding to be proactive within your circle of influence, knowing where you want to be in life, figuring out how to get there and working towards it, and focusing on the important things first to get there. This is how you become more effective as an individual. And the next 3 habits are about being effective as a team. Habit number 4 really is about thinking win-win and having that mentality. Imagine buying something expensive from a friend. There are different ways this can go down. You could pay too much for the item and feel betrayed by the friend. You could pay too little for the item and your friend feels betrayed by you. Or you both can argue your points and compromise on a price you both feel wronged with. Or you can both bicker at each other while attacking each other's thoughts, and no transaction takes place. This concept wants to focus on an alternative to all those possibilities. The win-win or no deal mentality. This is where you and your friend agree that if you can't agree on a price that's mutually beneficial, you both agree that you'd rather walk away without a deal. That way neither of you feel like you lost. There are certain requirements to have this mentality though. The first requirement is that you have to have integrity. If there's no integrity, others may see your sincerity as superficial. No one will trust you. No one will trust that you have win-win in mind. You have to have maturity. The maturity has to consist of consideration and courage. Consideration that you want to work for a win for your friend, and the courage to work for a win for yourself at the same time. It's not necessarily easy having the ability to have consideration towards what another person has an interest in. Or even if you have too much consideration, it's not easy to have the courage to work for a win for yourself. Consideration and courage are essential to have the maturity to be able to have the legitimate perspective of win-win or no deal. And the third requirement you need to have is the abundance mentality. Many people think that in order for me to win, someone else has to lose. Well, the abundance mentality is that there is plenty out there for everyone. Someone doesn't have to lose just for me to win. And with this habit, you have to authentically approach a situation. You have to develop the win-win or no-deal mentality. You have to authentically think it. And those are the requirements. You have to have the integrity. You have to have the maturity for consideration and courage for both of the parties to receive a win. And you have to have that abundance mentality. Just because I want to win doesn't mean someone else has to lose. There's plenty of wins out there for everyone. And that's the fourth habit. Think win-win. Imagine going to the eye doctor, and when you walk into their office, they just take the glasses off their face and hand you their glasses, saying, "Hey, these should work. They work for me." That scenario seems absurd, and I doubt any of us have experienced that. But if you think about it, we do it all the time. We prescribe advice before we even diagnose someone else's problem. Whether it be from a parent to a child, from a friend to a friend, we give advice before actually understanding what the other person's problem is. And that's this concept, is seek first to understand, then to be understood. And when we talk about seeking first to understand, we can't assume that we understand because we've experienced it ourselves before, saying, "I'm sick of work," and you respond, "I feel that way too, but we have to work to pay the bills." "Well, I know that, but my job absolutely sucks, honey. No matter what job we get, we're going to end up not liking it." Well, what happens in that scenario is you're now sitting on opposite sides of the table and bantering with one another instead of understanding the other person and looking at the problem together. There are different levels of listening. The first level of listening is ignoring, which is not listening at all. The second level is pretending, and then there's selective listening, which is listening to certain parts of what's being said. There's active and reflective listening, which are skills used to mimic what was said or to listen to something autobiographically. And I'd like you to think about that for a minute. Because when we think we're being very effective listeners, what we're actually doing is hearing what someone's saying and then comparing it to our own lives. We're using ourselves as a frame of reference. Well, there's an even more sophisticated level of listening, and that's empathic listening. This is listening with the intent to understand intellectually and emotionally. And just like anything else, there are developmental stages of empathic listening. And there are 4 of them. Imagine your partner told you, "I've had it with work." Well, in stage 1 of empathic listening, which is the most immature stage, what you'd be taught to do is to mimic the content. So if your partner said, "I've had it with work," you'd reply, "You've had it with work." And in a more developed stage, stage 2 of empathic listening, if your partner said, "I've had it with work," you would attempt to rephrase the content. "You're sick of work." And in the third stage of development of empathic listening, your partner might say, "I've had it with work," and you reflect the feeling that they're saying. You're feeling upset. And the most effective, most developed stage of empathic listening is to rephrase the content and reflect the feeling. This is a combination of stage 2 and 3 of development. If your partner said, "I've had it with work," you would reply, "You're feeling upset about work." And then you take this strategy of rephrasing the content and reflected the feeling throughout the conversation. It's used during conversations to truly understand the content and feelings of the other person's messages. If you carry these concepts through an entire conversation, you will be able to explain to the other person what their point of view is better than they could even understand it. It's at this point that we're both sitting on the same side of the table and looking at the problem together. And then we can try to come up with solutions. Only when we understand first, only when we truly understand someone's opinion, someone's viewpoint, and don't frame it on our own point of reference, only then would we be able to attempt to be understood. The time to be understood is when the conversation leads to logic and advice is requested. It's when your partner asks you, "Do you think I should be looking for another job?" That is logic. That is when you can provide your input. That is when you can attempt to be understood. But as soon as it goes back to an emotional response of, "I'm just so sick of the place,"
Well, that's when we start using that empathic listening again. That's when we rephrase the content and reflect the feeling again until logic is brought back into the conversation. And that's the fifth habit, is to seek first to understand, then to be understood. When someone says the word synergy, there's so much cliche brought behind that word. Synergy is always something that people now think of as smoke and mirrors, as some kind of magic key word that just causes CEOs to throw money at a consultant. Well, habit 6 is synergize. Synergy does exist, and synergy is explained very well in this chapter. I want you to imagine yourself in a group setting trying to solve a problem. I'll assume that you all were sitting around a table and you were all working towards solving a specific problem within your company, within your church, within your organization. As you all began to dissect the problem, I'm sure there was discussion on certain people's opinions on what you should do to solve it. Those opinions were probably picked apart, character was probably attacked, past ideas were probably brought up, fights occurred, name-calling happened, and the group probably felt worse off than before trying to solve this problem in a group setting. In order to hold an effective environment for synergy, there has to be authentic use of habits 4 and 5. Everyone at the table has to really understand the win-win or no-deal mentality. Everyone really has to seek first to understand, then to be understood. It's understanding that others will have different perspectives and different opinions than what you might have. And then that's valuable. Synergy is achieved when you value the difference everyone brings to the table and you work towards that third alternative together. The President of the United States doesn't bring a bunch of people that have the same opinion as he or she to a table. They bring the subject matter experts of every field that's involved in whatever problem they're trying to solve. The president and the president's cabinet value the differences, the different perspectives, and the differences in opinions that everyone is going to have to try to resolve this issue. They all value that, and they understand that they need each other in order to have that third alternative that's effective. And that's the sixth habit, synergy. When we look back at habits 4, 5, and 6, these are the habits that we need to have in order to have an effective, interdependent relationship with others. We have to possess a win-win or no-deal mentality. We have to seek first to understand, then be understood, and we have to achieve synergy. These 3 habits, in combinations with habits 1, 2, and 3, are how you become interdependent. Imagine you came across someone that was working very hard to saw down a tree. Hey, what are you doing? I'm trying to saw down this tree. Noticing how exhausted they looked, you'd ask, how long have you been doing this for? And when they respond for 5 hours, you go, well, hey, why don't you take a break and sharpen that saw? I'm sure you'd be done with it a lot sooner. And they replied, I don't have time to sharpen the saw. I have to cut down this tree. We can obviously all see the importance of sharpening that saw, and that's what this habit is to sharpen our saw. The only instrument we have to deal with life are ourselves. We are the instruments of our own performance. We have to be sharp, and we have to regularly sharpen our saws. To be the most effective saws we can be, we have to regularly sharpen 4 areas of our very nature. The first area we have to keep sharp is our physical nature. We have to eat right. We have to exercise. We have to manage our stress right. We have to focus on endurance, strength, and flexibility so we can be useful for longer. The most common excuse why we don't do this is that we don't have time. Remember the guy sawing at the tree with a dull saw? He didn't have time to stop and sharpen his saw. But he actually did, and it would have made his job easier had he found the time. If you really think to yourself, do I have time to go for that 1.5 mile run? You can absolutely find the time. It's just about finding the importance. That is a quadrant 2 activity. It's not urgent, but it's important. The second area we have to keep sharp is our spirituality. This is knowing your core, your center, your value system. Finding yourself in harmony with where you are in this world, with your existence. This is done through many ways, through meditation, through prayer, through thought, immersion in music, deeply understanding ourselves, finding ourselves in deep thought of where we are and where we want to be. The next area you need to keep sharp is your mental dimension. When we leave school, many of us allow our minds to fall into atrophy. We don't explore new subjects, we don't think analytically, we don't read, we watch television. We should continually expand our mind. We should be educating ourselves constantly in areas that help us achieve our goals in life. Immersing yourself into another culture, having deeper understanding of the world, these are the things that fulfill our mental need. And then the last area is a social or an emotional dimension. This is what we practice in our everyday interactions with others. This is practicing habits 4, 5, and 6 with others in your life. This practice builds on your intrinsic security, knowing that you can truly live interdependently with others, understand another human, work towards win-win goals effectively, finding your value in the community and making a difference. This is keeping your social and emotional dimension sharp. If you want to know the secret to a long, healthy, and happy life, it's the result of making contributions, of having those meaningful projects that are personally exciting to you and contribute to the lives of others. The process of habits 1 through 7 are self-renewing and are intended to be lived. And once we learn, commit, do them, we should be learning, committing, and doing them again. This constantly builds on the effectiveness of our past selves. And that's the 7th and final habit, is to sharpen the saw. There's a reason this book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, is consistently ranked in the top 100 books out of the hundreds of thousands of published books out there. If applied correctly, it's going to change your efficiency forever. Reading this book is the start of many success stories, and you can get your copy by clicking the link. If you like this video and you want to see other life-changing concepts, be sure to subscribe.